Okay, so we have got one coat of primer on. This is our first coat. We're now going to give it a decent sand. I'd go with a 320 after your first coat. If you've got a real heavier coat of primer, then you might want to go with something a bit rougher. And we're just going to rub that on this surface. Often what I recommend doing is taking it almost all the way back to the timber again. You can just faintly see it, and then that will mostly fill the grain. So this first coat of primer is about filling that grain up so we don't see the grain, and then give it a decent rub back with the 320, and then we'll give it another coat of primer. Now, the number of times you need to do this really depends on how well you've sanded, how well you've prepped it, and how well you've primed it. So it could be 3 or 4 coats of primer before you're ready for paint, or it could be 1 or 2. So you'll certainly need at least 2 coats. 1 of primer probably isn't enough. So as soon as I start seeing any sort of timber, I'm just going to stop sanding that, or sand that area a bit less. Smooth out these surfaces. Again, a little bit of a time lapse on this one, just so you don't have to sit here and watch me sand. So it is a little bit rinse and repeat on this process, on this step for the next little bit. So as many times priming and sanding as you need to get a pretty much finished car. When I've finished this one and I re-prime it, it's dried, I'll probably run over it with some 600, depending on how well it's finished. So my last one I want to sand with a 600, and I won't want to see any timber when I sand it with that final sand. So it might be, 3 or 4 coats of primer on there. I'm really happy with the surface finish. I'm going to hit it with a 600, then it will be ready for a paint. So that will be pop it onto one of these sticks, put some masking tape on there, and have your name and the colours that you want it to be, and we'll get that painted up. That is it for the paint prep stage. Then it will be onto the assembly stage. So just some tips, things that I'd recommend you do. Light coats of primer, lots of light coats of primer is better than one heavy coat. Sanding between coats, even the last one you still want to sand it just with the 600 or greater. If you want to go with even finer sandpaper, go for it. Also recommend you keep your axle holes free of paint. It is kind of hard not to get them at all, but it is worthwhile. Just as light as you can, dry a brush as possible when you're painting over the axle holes. Obviously when we spray the car, they'll get filled with paint anyway, but the less surface there is for the paint to land on in there, the better. We will use a little drill bit without the drill, just to reopen that hole, so before we assemble it. So sand prime as many times as you need to get the car into a finished state. I won't do any more videos on sanding and priming. I'll skip straight ahead into the final paint video, and then we'll assemble it. Now ready for our second coat of primer. So we'll apply it exactly the same way, and just try to keep it as thin a coat as possible. You might want to just make sure you give it a bit of a dust before you give it this second coat of primer. Again, if you've got any machine marks, it's you want to sand them back with the rougher sort of grade sandpapers. Get that out of the way, get that sanded right back, and then give it another prime. You're not going to be able to apply enough primer to sort of fill up those sorts of holes in your work. work. So sand them out. That's the important part. Now be gentle as you can. It's easy enough to break the wings off of these things. If you do break a wing, come and see me, get you some super glue, pop the wing back on, and then we'll need some timber filler in around that join mark before we can continue painting and priming.